Breaking news: Seth Rollins hospitalized after vicious attack from Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed. Seth Rollins was rushed to a local medical facility following one of the most brutal and legitimately dangerous attacks in WWE history, and the severity of the injuries he sustained from Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed's vicious assault has doctors concerned about potential complications that could sideline the Architect for months or even threaten his ability to continue wrestling at the level that's defined his career. What happened on Monday Night Raw went far beyond the typical worked violence that creates drama for television. This was a systematic targeting of vulnerable body parts with force and intent that crossed professional boundaries, and multiple witnesses backstage are reporting that the attack looked and felt less like a choreographed segment and more like two monsters genuinely trying to end someone's career. But here's what's going to absolutely infuriate you and raise serious questions about WWE's safety protocols. According to multiple sources with knowledge of the situation, the attack that sent Seth to the hospital wasn't entirely scripted or approved by producers in the way it was executed. While there was supposed to be a beatdown angle involving Braun and Bronson attacking Seth, the intensity, duration, and specific targeting of injuries went significantly beyond what was planned, and by the time officials realized the attack had gone off script and into dangerous territory, Seth had already sustained damage that requires serious medical evaluation and potentially surgical intervention. The most disturbing part is how Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed are reportedly justifying the severity of their assault. According to backstage sources, both men have told anyone who'll listen that they were just making it look real and that if Seth couldn't handle the intensity of a proper beatdown, maybe he's not as tough as his reputation suggests. This dismissive attitude toward potentially causing serious injury to a colleague has created a toxic divide in the locker room between veterans who are horrified by the recklessness and younger wrestlers who see Braun and Bronson's aggressive approach as the kind of intensity that modern wrestling needs to feel authentic and dangerous. And WWE management's response to this situation is what's really going to make you question the company's priorities. Instead of immediately suspending or disciplining Braun and Bronson for going off script and potentially injuring a top star, officials are reportedly debating whether the massive attention and social media engagement the attack generated is worth more than enforcing safety standards and protecting performer well-being. The cynical calculation about whether ratings and buzz justify tolerating dangerous in-ring behavior is creating an environment where wrestlers are afraid that speaking up about safety concerns will get them labeled as soft or unwilling to do what's necessary for compelling television. The question that should terrify every WWE superstar is this: if Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed can hospitalize a main event talent by working too stiff and going beyond what was agreed upon, and if management's primary concern is whether it makes good television rather than whether it's acceptable workplace conduct, what's stopping other performers from deciding that their career advancement is worth risking their colleagues' health and safety? Let me tell you exactly what happened during this vicious attack, what injuries Seth sustained, and what the fallout means for everyone involved. The attack occurred during Monday Night Raw's main event segment as part of the ongoing storyline involving Seth Rollins, Braun Breaker, and Bronson Reed. The planned segment was supposed to feature Braun and Bronson attacking Seth in a beatdown that would write him off television temporarily while also establishing the two monsters as legitimate threats who needed to be taken seriously as main event players. However, what was supposed to be a controlled, choreographed beatdown that looked devastating but was actually safe quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. Multiple sources who were watching from guerrilla position report that within the first minute of the attack, it became clear that Braun and Bronson were working significantly stiffer than what had been discussed in the pre-show production meeting. The first major concern came when Bronson Reed delivered a tsunami splash to Seth with force that sent Seth's head snapping back against the canvas in a way that immediately raised red flags for anyone watching who understood proper technique and safety. Seth's reaction wasn't the controlled selling that professional wrestlers use to make moves look impactful, it was genuine disorientation from having his head bounced off the mat with unprotected force. But instead of recognizing that the move had been delivered too aggressively and adjusting their approach, Braun and Bronson continued escalating the intensity. Braun delivered a spear that targeted Seth's ribs with a shoulder tackle that was stiff enough that the sound of impact echoed through the arena in a way that made fans uncomfortable rather than excited. The attack continued with both men taking turns delivering power moves, strikes, and submissions that were clearly being executed with more force than necessary for television drama. Seth tried multiple times to communicate with both men, using the subtle signals wrestlers use to tell their opponents to ease up or adjust what they're doing, but Braun and Bronson either didn't notice or chose to ignore those signals. The moment that apparently triggered officials to finally intervene came when Braun Breaker applied a submission hold to Seth's arm with torque and pressure that was legitimately dangerous. Seth's screams weren't the performed agony of a wrestler selling, they were genuine cries of pain from someone whose arm was being wrenched in ways that could cause ligament damage or dislocation. Referees and producers rushed to the ring to break up the attack, but by that point Seth had been subjected to several minutes of unsafe work that had caused accumulating damage to multiple body parts. When the segment finally ended and Seth was helped backstage, it was immediately obvious to everyone present that he wasn't just selling, he was legitimately hurt and needed medical attention. WWE's medical staff conducted an immediate evaluation and determined that Seth needed to be transported to a local hospital for imaging and comprehensive assessment of his injuries. The specific concerns included potential rib fractures or internal bruising from the repeated power moves and the particularly stiff spear that Braun delivered. Chest and torso injuries can be serious because they affect breathing and can involve organ damage if the trauma is severe enough. Possible concussion or head trauma from the way Seth's head impacted the canvas during Bronson's tsunami splash. Even one unprotected head impact can cause concussion symptoms, and Seth took multiple impacts during the extended beatdown. Arm and shoulder injuries from the torque submission hold that Braun applied with excessive force. Ligament damage in the shoulder or elbow can require surgery and months of rehabilitation, potentially threatening a wrestler's career if severe enough. General soft tissue damage and bruising throughout Seth's body from the accumulation of stiff strikes and unsafe bumps over the course of the attack. While individually these might not be serious, the cumulative effect of multiple unsafe moves can create complications. Seth was transported by ambulance to the medical facility, and while WWE has been deliberately vague about the specific results of the medical evaluation, sources close to the situation indicate that Seth is being held for observation and further testing, which suggests doctors are concerned about potential complications that require monitoring. The backstage reaction to this incident has been explosive and revealed deep divisions within WWE's roster about what constitutes acceptable in-ring work and how seriously safety should be prioritized versus creating compelling television. Veteran wrestlers are almost universally furious about what happened. Multiple main event level talents have expressed concern that if Braun and Bronson can work this recklessly with a protected top star like Seth Rollins without facing immediate consequences, what would stop them or other ambitious younger wrestlers from deciding that their career advancement justifies working unsafe with anyone? Several veterans have reportedly approached management demanding that Braun and Bronson be suspended or at minimum required to undergo additional training about working safely and respecting their opponent's well-being. The argument is that professional wrestling requires trust between performers, and working stiff or going off script in ways that cause actual injury destroys that trust and creates an environment where nobody feels safe working with anyone. But the response from some younger wrestlers has been more mixed and in some cases openly supportive of Braun and Bronson's aggressive approach. According to sources, there's a faction of rising talent who believe that modern wrestling has become too soft and too protective, and that Braun and Bronson's willingness to work with legitimate intensity is what's needed to make matches feel dangerous and real rather than choreographed and safe. This generational divide is creating intense locker room tension, with younger wrestlers accusing veterans of being afraid of real physicality and veterans accusing younger wrestlers of being reckless and unprofessional. The conflict is making it difficult for wrestlers to work together because everyone is questioning whether their opponents will respect agreed-upon safety protocols or decide that making their offense look impressive is more important than protecting their colleagues. WWE management's response has been the most controversial aspect of this entire situation. Instead of immediately addressing the safety concerns and disciplining the wrestlers who went off script, officials have been primarily focused on damage control from a public relations perspective and evaluating whether the attention generated by the incident justifies the methods used to create it. Multiple sources report that there have been heated discussions among WWE executives about whether Braun and Bronson should face consequences. Some officials argue that working unsafe and potentially injuring a top star should result in immediate suspension regardless of any other considerations. Others counter that the attack generated massive social media engagement and online discussion, and that in an era where attention is currency, maybe the company should be encouraging rather than punishing intensity that creates buzz. The cynical calculation about whether injuries are acceptable if they generate engagement is what's really disturbing wrestlers who are concerned about their long-term health. If management is willing to tolerate unsafe work because it trends on social media, the implicit message is that performers' health is less important than ratings and online metrics. Now here's the question that's going to determine where you stand on this entire controversy. Should Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed be suspended or disciplined for working too stiff and potentially injuring Seth Rollins? Or should they be praised for bringing legitimate intensity that makes wrestling feel real and dangerous? Your answer reveals whether you prioritize performer safety and professional standards, or whether you think creating authentic feeling violence justifies risks to wrestlers' health. Here's the even more controversial question: is Seth Rollins partially responsible for his own injuries if he couldn't protect himself adequately during the attack, or is it entirely on Braun and Bronson for working unsafely? Because there's an argument that professional wrestlers should be able to defend themselves and that if Seth couldn't handle the intensity, that's a problem. But there's also a strong case that wrestling requires trust and cooperation, and that blaming someone for getting hurt when their opponents work recklessly is victim blaming that enables dangerous behavior. Tell me in the comments, do you think WWE should prioritize safety even if it means less intense and realistic-looking violence, or should performers be expected to work with legitimate intensity and accept injuries as part of the business? And here's what I really want to know: if you were a wrestler, would you want to work with Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed after seeing how they worked with Seth, or would you refuse to be in the ring with them out of safety concerns? Seth Rollins being hospitalized after a vicious attack from Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed isn't just about one incident or one injury, it's exposed fundamental questions about what standards should govern professional wrestling and whether the drive to create compelling television justifies putting performers at genuine risk. The fact that this attack went beyond what was scripted and caused legitimate injuries that required hospitalization should be a red line that triggers immediate consequences. But WWE's apparent hesitation to discipline the wrestlers responsible because the incident generated attention suggests that the company's priorities might not align with protecting performer well-being. And the locker room divide between wrestlers who see this as unacceptable recklessness and those who view it as necessary intensity reveals that there's no consensus within the industry itself about where the boundaries should be between worked violence and dangerous reality. What's certain is that Seth Rollins is dealing with real injuries from an attack that went too far, and how WWE responds to this situation will set precedent for what kind of behavior is acceptable moving forward. If Braun and Bronson face no meaningful consequences, the message is clear: generating buzz matters more than safety, and wrestlers should expect to be put at risk if it creates compelling television.